Welcome. My name is Clare
Thanks.
Maxwell, and this is the Embodied Learning Systems YouTube channel. And today's video is about this question: should somatic training be foundational for therapists? So I'm here to talk with my colleague and friend, Alison Taylor. I'm so excited. Alison is a psychotherapist. Her company is called Present Sensing Psychotherapy. And we're talking about this because this is what we talk about all the time. Full disclosure, we love to talk about issues in our profession. We've been doing this on Zoom since way before COVID, right, Alison? I think we
Yes,
started talking before COVID.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah. So welcome.
Thank you,
Um,
Claire.
Here's what I had written for your bio. So you can feel free to add anything. I
Okay.
said, Alison is a singer, musician, and educator, a music educator. That was one piece of work that you did and maybe still do. You're a teacher of the Alexander Technique and Wholeness in Motion, which is the work of Babette Leitner who we've talked about. You're a Canadian, and you're a psychotherapist, which is all so amazing. And it's been a journey um, that I've loved watching and been really inspired by. And what I would say you offer is an embodied whole person approach to psychotherapy. And
Mhm.
you're even doing outdoor therapy sessions, which I hope we can get to. That's like, oh my God, I wish I could have that. So maybe we'll land there at the end of our conversation. So welcome.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thanks for your kind and thoughtful words.
Anything that you would add that you would want people to know about you as a
Um,
person,
as a human
as
person,
a
yeah,
human person?
who's not just
Yeah.
jobs. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think my work is my life and informed by my life and also informs my life, and my life informs my work. So I'm a very novice baker. Um, I enjoy hiking enormously. Um, I've recently started strength training, and I'm a cat mom. And I would add to the psychotherapy piece that I'm trained in a modality called Gestalt. And so I would say I'm a Gestalt therapist. My designation is psychotherapist in my province, but I'm a Gestalty, as we say, first and foremost. And
That's
that,
so gestalty.
yes, isn't it to say that? Yeah. Yeah. And so we'll probably get into what that means. There's not going to be a test at the end. No one watching needs to know necessarily, but Gestalt is a here and now approach, and relational Gestalt means that we work with what's happening between you and I. And that is happening in therapy and also in life, in and between you and I right now. We're
It
going to see what comes up
is.
between you and I, even though we both have that we want to talk about.
Well, yeah, because I want to really honor that, the audience here is somanauts,
That's a great word.
therapists, people who are wanting to have a better relationship with their body and use their body more skillfully. Um, so I'm pretty sure that they'll be interested. I really hope they'll be interested in this core topic that we decided to land on, um,
Mm,
which is coming out of a series of conversations I'm having with therapists, discovering what their lives are like and what their challenges are,
mhm,
and what the challenges of training are. So, like, the name of my channel is Embodied Learning Systems, and our topic is really about what could be a better training for therapists. Um, Certainly, there's lots of training for therapists, right?
yeah, yeah, for sure.
You go through a lot of training. So,
Yes.
um, so this question of should somatic training be foundational, I think it might be helpful for some of our audience for us to riff a little bit about what we mean by that. What is a foundational somatic practice? So I don't mean to like spring that question on you cold. But if you just kind of sit with it for a second, like when I was thinking about that question this morning, I thought, well, because we have the AT Alexander technique process in common, which is famous for helping people support themselves through their postural system. The postural system is a pretty emotional thing to be able to support yourself, right? So that I thought, well, that's pretty foundational. And posture is just about, for me, just about your relationship to gravity. It doesn't mean, because there's so many different kinds of bodies with the different kinds of abilities and nervous systems. So we're not all upright, but we all exist in the gravitational field. So we're not all bipedal, but we all have a deep relationship to contact with the earth and the ground. So that was one thing I came up. Anything come to mind as I'm riffing?
So many like starbursts of thoughts and ideas being with what you're saying. Yeah. I guess I can give an example of how I experience somatic work or embodied work in this very moment as it came up when you said your question initially. I imagined you were going to ask, so Alison, would you like to speak a bit on, what is a somatic education? And I felt like a little like fizz in my chest and a little kind of, like a bracing almost in my shoulders, like, oh no, I didn't prepare that. And then when you said, we're going to riff back and forth on this, I felt, oh, something really soften. And so that kind of awareness, being able to hone that kind of awareness over time, moment to moment awareness of what my experience is, how I experience myself. I'm taking words from my favorite teachers, but really how I experience myself gives me information about how I'm doing. And that even in this moment with you, my friend and colleague, in this recorded kind of quite casual, semi-formal chat, is really helpful for me to know, oh, I got a little fizz of sensation there. So in my experience in Gestalt, somatic awareness or body awareness or sensational information, it's all baked into the therapy training. And I'm not sure that that's a part of all therapy trainings. So that's one piece, that it gives me information and keeps expanding my awareness of myself, and how I'm responding to you and how I'm responding to the situation. And as a therapist and human, to me, that's very important, because then I can respond from a place of a little more awareness each time I notice that fizziness. I get more information about it, rather than responding from urgency or an ungrounded place. We could talk about grounding for 25 hours, I'm sure. And the postural piece, I love how it's beautiful to me how you spoke about posture. And I think there's so many ways to talk about it. I'm going to misremember, so you correct me or fix what I say if it needs. But something about our relationship with the earth or relationship with forces. And that's part of how we experience ourselves in the world. And so through the Alexander technique, I learned that was my first window into really being aware of myself in space. My first exposure to really kinesthetic awareness, proprioceptive awareness, interoceptive awareness, what's happening in my being, and relational awareness, how I'm taking care of myself with you. So yeah, I think posture can be so much more than an alignment model or mm, correct use, or that kind of thing. I think it's a little more
Yeah,
than
like
that.
if you make it a verb like posturing, that
Mm,
it gets a bad rap, but
mm,
in the Alexander um, traditional Alexander work is a touch-based work, so it's nonverbal.
that's right.
And I know Gestalt uses the word contact, but that's
Mhm.
what Alexander technique is, touch contact, that's so different than other touch modalities because
Mhm.
it's a postural communication, I guess I would
Mm,
say, between two systems, right?
beautiful. Yeah.
And so we locate each other in relationship to each other, we affect each other, and something new happens that can't happen when you're alone, you know.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, but then there's an impression in your system and you're like changed somehow and you're like, oh, I could be like that. Interesting.
Yes, this is also possible in a way I didn't have access to or even know before just now. That's pretty wild. For me, that was pretty wild when I started the technique. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So we don't need to go into it too much, but for people to have uh, because I think somatic in the therapeutic language is a very rich topic.
I
But
agree.
when we use the word foundational, I think nobody owns what the foundations are, but different trainings have different views of what the foundations are. And so we might get a little bit more into that. But I think that's a good enough introduction. And what I remember you saying is that your opinion from your experience, right? This came out of your experience was somatic work should not be an add-on, that it could be something that's a foundational through line for therapists. Now, of course, you and I have the luxury of having had that experience. So
Yeah.
maybe you could talk a little bit about how your Alexander grounding and other somatic practices that you did, how that affected your experience of training as a therapist, and what you saw. Why are you saying that? Like, what does that come out of? From how?
Hmm.
Because you had no choice. You were going to see what you were seeing in your training processes through the
Hmm.
lens of your own experience.
Hmm. Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I'm just gonna take a moment and take in like really the fullness of that question, and see where to go.
Like the, not to make it more complex for you, but just what were the problems and challenges that you saw people struggling with?
Mm-hmm.
And even having that training, you may have had struggles of your own. So, feel free to talk from your own
Mm-hmm.
experience as well.
Mm. I think it's really important how you started that invitation, the preamble being, of course, this is from my, like, this is my bias, and
Yeah.
how I feel about the importance of somatic work, or body process in therapy, is of course influenced by my experience. Um, I'm a singer as well, and pianist. So um, by the time I found my way to the Alexander technique, I had a lot of pain issues, and pain is usually an entry point to, I don't know about you, Claire, but a lot of folks who found their way to me when I was still teaching full-time voice and movement would be, they're already at the point where they're in pain, and that's interfering with, their life or art. And as therapists, I'm not sure yet because I'm new-ish to the profession, but it's mm, the issues that we might have in our physical selves as therapists are different than maybe as a singer, a pianist, or an instrumentalist who's using their physical structure in a different way. But coming into the Gestalt training program, and this is not going to be linear, it's going to be,
It's
jumping
fine.
around like a
Yep.
spiral. Coming into the Gestalt training program, very new, like eyes wide open with wonder and excitement. I'm coming in with almost a decade of Alexander teaching, and before that, about 5 years of lessons and voice, singing as well. So I'm coming in with a really particular awareness of my psychophysical being, my thinking and moving self,
Mhm.
as we kind of talk about in Alexander. And a lot of my colleagues didn't have that background. They had another type of rich background or a cognitive therapy background. And because our particular training in contemporary relational Gestalt is very focused on body process and building our physical awareness, like sensational awareness, I think I did have, I don't want to say advantage, but I had an access to that part of my experience that some colleagues didn't. And then throughout the 5 year training, we all found more of a common ground
Mm.
because we were learning together. Um,
Would you call it nonverbal?
mm, this is like a huge area, I think,
It's a
because
tip of an iceberg.
it's a tip of an iceberg.
Yeah.
Short answer, I would say yes.
Mhm.
And in that umbrella of nonverbal
To verbal.
communication, yeah. But under
Right.
that umbrella, I'd also include pre-verbal knowing, developmentally. I'm also working with Ruella Frank, as you and I chatted
Yes, I
about,
totally
training
was
in,
going to bring that in. Yeah.
yeah, her work is in developmental, somatic psychotherapy. And we're working more developmentally, um, how we learn to interact with the world and make contact.
Mhm.
Um, I'm veering off from answering your question, but I
Yeah.
guess some
Sorry
of
about
the,
that.
no, it's good because you put a lot of good stuff on our table, like our buffet here. Um,
Mhm.
but maybe I'll pause and see if you want to redirect, and I could say more about issues that maybe I observed or imagined.
Yeah, the challenges that you saw people facing. So what we've kind of done um, is we've introduced the developmental piece, which is a huge topic in therapy and therapeutic training, and the development of the individual from infancy, nonverbal engagement with the world and people, to giving and having all that sensory experience and then giving words to it and connecting with people that way with words and that kind of expression. So
Mhm.
that's a whole kind of growth and development that we're all interested in. Embodiment
Mm,
teachers, therapists, we're all interested in that. But I'm talking about the what where some of the skills that you knew you had. Um, Not that it just makes your experience different, but did it cause you like distress, or did you have empathy with struggles that you saw people having? Not, it's not to judge it, but it's sort of like, I mean, one thing I wrote down was we were talking about CBT, which is a form of work that helps a lot of people. And you
mhm,
said something about it's exciting work because it is effective, but that from your lens, it was happening too quickly for something.
mhm,
And what is
mhm.
that thing? Well, what was the, like, because with embodiment work, there's a surrender to biological time,
Oh,
to,
beautiful. Yeah.
if that makes any sense.
Mm,
Cognitive time can take over,
yeah.
right? And go too fast for biological time and
Yeah.
relation and growth and development.
Mhm.
So does that help you?
Oh, that's so, yeah, beautiful. And like kind of slows everything down from, oh, I'm trying to find an answer for Claire's question to, oh, yeah, biological time is slower, less linear, logical in a different way. And
Mm.
yeah, I'm sitting for a nanosecond longer in that. even just you saying that, what that conjures is something, yeah, it's helpful to hear you say that. And yeah, what's coming up for me now is working from an only cognitive place has its like merits, and in my personal experience also. And it's in the pursuit of changing a behavior or fixing that in my experience, it's too fast and misses sort of the crux, which is actually alerting someone to how they got to that point. I can't think of an example right now. I mean, maybe stage fright, like performance anxiety, or nervousness to speak publicly or something like that. Like, oh, if I just change my thought and how I'm relating to these ideas about myself, that's great. It's going to get me on stage and I can talk myself into it and, not necessarily have to feel what's going on down here.
Yeah.
And that's really helpful when you have to
You
get
got to
up there
do it.
and get some
You got to get
done.
up there and do it.
Yeah.
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 It has a great function. And then over time, sometimes it can be helpful to actually attend to what is happening, even as I'm imagining that stimulus. And here's where support of the Alexander technique was really useful for me, is in our process, the Alexander process of pausing and noticing, and eventually having a choice to try a different approach, to go about it a bit differently. That's something that wasn't, I don't think, in the awareness of my colleagues at the Training Institute, like that process of inquiry. And I think that is a cognitive process that includes my whole being, possibly, because Alexander technique is cognitive,
It
but
is cognitive,
in a different way.
but lately I've really been realizing, and this is really just for me, that there's something about the process, if I really surrender to it, that invites in unconscious and involuntary activity in my system, which is very good. Like, yeah, there's connection between what we're thinking and how we're responding to our own thought processes. But then there's also our history of those habits were very good at adaptations, which I think something that Gestalt really looks at, like, how did that fit together? How is that?
Yes.
How do those two things come? And that
Yes.
recognition of understanding was necessary for me to enter into a more caring, loving relationship with my habits and myself.
So important.
And so even I think in the Alexander universe, we can actually have the same issue of putting too much trust in the cognitive process and not understanding that that process invites in unconscious choice as well as conscious choice. Like,
you just alerted me to something important that we had talked about before. Is it okay? I'm jumping in.
Go for it. Go for it.
Because I got excited.
Yay!
That actually changing a habit, or what in Gestalt we talk about as a creative adaptation to a situation, way back, earlier down the line, before you really understand the function or the usefulness, you miss a whole territory of possibly really useful information. And so in many cases, I was going to say only in therapy, but probably this is true for what we're working on in the Alexander technique as well. In many cases, those creative adjustments or creative adaptations were the only way we knew how to survive. And when I say survive, I'm talking like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like really fundamental survival of I'm a little being, I need these people and structures around me to sustain my life. And so in order to belong, like belonging is an act of survival. And so
It's
that's the ways.
foundational.
It is foundational. Yeah. It's like
Right?
very much in parallel to a therapy training for sure.
Yeah.
So it's not a matter of just, oh, I see my shoulders up again. I'm going to tell myself to, no, not that. I can do less or whatever. That's so important that I have access to that. But if I don't understand, like, what is it that my shoulders are trying to say to me right now or trying to say to you right now, is one way to understand how have I come to this place where when I'm trying to navigate uncertainty, that this is my way. And it's so important and magnificent that I knew to do this to survive somehow, that now I'm only doing it inside. You can't even see it, but it's still there. And so being with that now in its fullness can be really informative. And I would never want to take something away from someone that keeps them like alive and able to be like, this is how I'm able to be present with you this is my way of being present with you or contacting you. It's how I've learned to do it. And I don't know yet if something else is possible between us. Time will tell.
Yeah.
How am I
Uh,
doing with that answer now?
oh, I mean, the answers are great. I'm just thinking, back to our pain point
Mm,
for a therapist, because in talking to therapists, I'm aware that there are various ways that burnout plays out in the process of becoming a therapist. And then, like the training process itself is very intense. And I hear about a lot of burnout depending on that process that
yeah.
you are going through. And then there's also what you have to do in the first years of practice, the learning that first, 1 to 7 years can be very
Mm-hmm.
challenging. And there's something that you called self-support that you feel resourced with,
Yes. Yes.
um, which can seem impossibly sophisticated when you're really um, overwhelmed with the emotions that you're having
Yeah.
in response to what you're seeing in your work, or even just about how you are responding and what's going
Mm-hmm.
on for you as a person and how to support yourself. And I was really moved when we were talking because you said burnout in teaching. So a lot of my audience is educators, and social work should not be acceptable,
Agree. Still stand
you
by
know?
it.
And we both feel that. We also know that things that are not acceptable are happening all around us.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives me a buzz, it gives me a
Mm-hmm.
charge just talking about it. I get
Yes. Same.
upset, I get angry, um, you know, and we don't necessarily have solutions. You also said that you felt self-support is baked into Gestalt, but as we said, Gestalt is something that comes after, for most people, after
Yeah.
their undergrad degree or a counseling degree or something
Mm-hmm.
like that. Gestalt is very rarely the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Although for you it was, right?
Yeah.
You were probably drawn to it because of where you already were at. But
Yes.
so if you can think of the person, we don't have much time left, but if you could think of the person who's like maybe resonating with what we're saying and wondering if this could maybe help them, if they're, feeling on the edge of burnout. Have you seen colleagues go through that? Am
Mm-hmm.
I on to something, or am I like blowing something out of proportion? I think not, because you were like just as pissed off as I
I'm quite adamant for myself and
am.
for you and for our, cousins, our family of
Our
movement
relatives, yeah.
educators, our relatives out there, friends, colleagues, that burnout is not acceptable. It should not be normalized. Like, oh yeah, you can expect to be, burnt out in the first 7 years. So if they're me included, like someone who's listening to this and also feeling charged up, or maybe it's brand new information. Gestalt is one approach. Alexander technique is another approach. Wholeness in motion is another approach. And there are many that I don't even know about, of course, yet,
Mhm.
that invite me, I can speak for myself, have invited me closer and closer to myself. So self-support is a Gestalt term, like self-support and environmental support or relational support, relational with even like an object, actually connecting with your the support that's coming from the ground. It
Oh,
can
that
seem
helps me.
so,
Even just now, I was like, oh, because I was getting a little lost in you and a little
yeah.
lost in my topic and thinking about all of our, I was charged. And now I'm like, I'm in the picture. I'm here. I can
And
feel
when
my
you,
back, you know?
yes. And when you
Yeah.
say we don't have solutions for what's going on around us, I don't I don't know if I fully agree. Like, I don't have a systemic, like, what we're talking about are systemic issues. Like, even
Yes.
burnout is the product of a system that doesn't have support built in for individuals. But the lostness and even my kind of rushing and scrambling to find an answer is really of the field. It's like, it's a vibration that's the field phenomenon is something that we talk about in Gestalt, but it's if that's our experience together trying to navigate this topic, we're not alone. If anyone's listening and feeling like really foggy or zoned out, that's a symptom of the vibe that we're in, the environment that we're in, like an unsupported environment. And just starting by how am I making contact with the ground through my foot? And how am I able to feel the pushing back of the ground? To what degree? If not at all, start there. What's that nothing like? It's can seem really unattainable. Like, well, my client load is impossible and I'm not able to meet with my supervisor or mentors. The swirl starts and then we get lost in that swirl.
Yes. And
How do
how
you
could that
expect me?
possibly help? How could
Right.
feeling my foot possibly be a solution? And yet you and I know that it's so powerful,
It's so powerful. And
so powerful.
it's really sometimes the only thing you can be sure of.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yes.
quite moving to say. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
I feel like everything that we could offer today is in this container. Um, and I feel moved by us including the audience in that way.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
it's been that kind of compassionate, empathetic circle day. You
Mm.
know, if anybody's listening to this, we are talking like 5 days before the election in the US here.
Yep.
So to be able to do this, you know, to connect is even just an important thing.
Yeah. It might be all we have
All we have,
that's graspable, each
yeah,
other
each other. That's
and
right.
ourselves. Mhm.
Which go together, and that is so foundational and fundamental and nonverbal. So I can say also to guide people, we're not going to have time to talk about it, but to Ruella Frank's developmental psychotherapy work. I
Mhm.
know that she has layered Alexander as way back in her history. Work with Bonnie
Mhm.
Bainbridge Cohen is in her history, and Gestalt is in her history. She
Mhm.
welcomes, for embodiment folks in the audience, she welcomes people like me, who I'm not a trained psychotherapist, into
That's right.
certain parts of her workshop. So if you're curious about this stuff, you can just reach out to Ruella and go deeper into it. And Gestalt is a great resource. And Alexander technique is a foundational kind of work if you are feeling like you know you need something a little bit less intellectual and cognitive and a little bit more duh. I call it like stupid brain. Like, what?
I need that someday. Yes, so
yes,
often.
to support you as a therapist, and just
Yeah.
reach out. So maybe we'll have to do another interview about outdoor therapy, but if you're curious about that work that Alison is doing also, we know that our systems regulate with nature and a more open field of attention that we don't have when we're in a room. It's a different kind of contact.
Even
Yeah.
just looking all around when you're with your client, you don't have to tell your client what you're up to, but if you are noticing like, oh, I was really pulled into you,
Yeah.
you can be pondering what they're saying, but really you're looking around. Yeah.
Yeah. It's okay to include the other in your peripheral and take in the support. Yeah.
Yeah, you matter so much. The therapist matters. And
Ah,
I want to say too that Babette Leitner, one of my other teachers, is doing amazing work with wholeness in motion and wholeness activism. So in a time where, social justice and activism are
mhm.
important, wholeness activism starts with us in relation to each other in the world. And so that's another area that's
I'm probably a wholeness
supportive.
activist and I didn't
I
even know
think
it.
you definitely are, in my estimation.
So you can
Yeah.
find Alison at presentsensing.com. Is that correct? Yep.
Yes.
That will be in the description box.
Cool.
And let us know, ask us questions in the YouTube land below the description box.
Yeah.
And I will answer them. And if you have a question for Alison, I'll reach out to her. We can get some dialogue going if this dialogue interests you. And Alison, thank you so much for just being alive and sharing your wisdom with us. Yeah.
Thank you, Claire. It's been
Peace
so
and
nice to
love.
be with you.
Yeah.